Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here in Australia. I've been having such a wonderful time. It's been just incredible to visit and to meet so many new people. So I am Heidi Helfand. I'm going to talk with you about dynamic reteaming. It is a LeanPub book that you can get. It's free at the moment, and you can check that out. But first, I'm going to start with something that kind of reminds me of robots here. That's why I have this picture. I've been in the software industry almost 20 years now, and I've always had the advice, the suggestions that, the best teams are the ones that stay the same. We want people to get to know each other and form and gel and keep them together. Then we can have better predictability and other things. And I'm like, all right. Kind of feels a little bit mechanistic, and I think throughout the years I've noticed different things that kind of call this into question. And so I'm going to bring up a few of those things today, because I think, first of all, stagnation, it's very real. How many of you have ever had the experience where you've been on a team too long and you just feel like things are stagnating? There's a lot of hands up here. It's like almost like you're stuck in the goo. Things are not as compelling as they used to be. It's a very real concept. All right, well, but people say keep your teams the same. Well, what about this? It just might not feel so awesome. It might be a little bit boring, but we're there and we're doing our work. Maybe we're assigned to a team and we really didn't want to be on that team. Have you ever experienced that? We really need you to move over here and do this. Go do that for me. Well, there's something about that. Other problems too. You just might be sick of the people you're working with. We're humans after all. We like variety at times. And then there's this. What if they pay you a lot? The golden handcuffs. I was consulting and I worked with some people who had been at the same company for so long, and it was almost like it really hurt me because some of the things that they had worked on had been shelved and the treatment wasn't so great, but they were paid such a great amount of money and they had flexibility in their jobs that they stayed. All right, suddenly you're going to be an iOS developer, but you're a Windows developer this whole time. It's not your idea, but they pay it. I think these are very real things. And keep your teams the same. The other thing is that, they say keep your teams the same, but the reality is that people don't always stay at companies. We don't always stay on the same teams, and frankly, it feels very different when people leave our teams. How many of you have had people that have left your teams before? It's a very real thing, huh? And sometimes we're frankly glad that they're gone. I mean, hey, remember that person that was on your team and maybe they didn't treat you very well or your coworkers very well and they left, but it took a long time just to try to shake it off that they're gone. They almost linger on like ghosts. But other times it can be, I think a lot of this is stories of love and loss. This is a picture of one of my teams, one of my first teams that I was on. This is probably the year 2000 or 1999. ExpertCity.com will tell you a story about them a little later. But after we had gotten acquired, one of our founders left, and it was so hard. It was so hard for us. We didn't want him to leave, and he was, many of us, he was our mentor, Klaus Schauser, computer science professor from University of California, Santa Barbara. And I live in Santa Barbara. But anyway, it can be a huge loss when people leave our teams. It's just reality. These are going to happen. And what if that person leaves, but they're the only one that understands that one system? So much that even when they went on vacation, they had to be on call, like Joe here. He's trying to enjoy himself. He has his computer with him. But, he's probably coming back after vacation. But what if he actually leaves the company? That is very unsafe. And then we, as the remaining team members, need to take over what he did. And hopefully, maybe he wrote tests for what he worked on or other things. But just very unsafe, not so much redundancy. And then there's the other, for some, very real and unfortunate situation that, at times, and I've been as a consultant at one point in my career. I was with a company and I was coaching a team, And all the teams around my team got laid off, and we were the only ones there. It's very real that sometimes we have departures that are more than one person. And then we have the other thing where, more of a positive situation. Here's Gary. I loved working with Gary. And, so again, team change is very real. So sometimes we get new people, and we have another challenge. How are we going to get them integrated into the teams? I set him up with my PowerBook 160 there to help him thrive quickly. A little bit of fun there. I had my old Mac Plus there. I had a whole great setup for him. But how are we going to onboard the new people that join our teams? And then what happens when they arrive in a batch? It's quite different to onboard people in a batch than to onboard just one person. So team change is very real. Here's another photo of the second startup I was at. We grew really big. Well, to us, this was big. Our first team, we grew big. Things started taking longer. And can any of you relate to this? Have you ever been on a team where your team just kept adding people, grew pretty big? Raise your hand if that's the case for you. Okay. So it's like, what do you do with that? All right, well, keep teams the same, keep teams the same. Well, hello, sometimes our companies grow. I've been at 3 successful startups in the past 20 years. The first one, I was number 15. I left when there were 700. Second one, I was number 10. I left when there were 650. People come and go from teams. Team change is very real, especially when you're fast growing. And then there's this. I'm very interested in this concept. I've been on the first team, the initial team at a startup that grew very big. I've been in that situation twice. How do we maintain our culture, whatever that means, as our companies grow bigger? So, summary of some of the problems I went over. We might feel team stagnation. Sometimes we're placed on a team where we have those people on the team that feel, maybe kind of irritating, golden handcuffs. People are going to leave. People are going to come and go. Team change is very real. So Tuckman. How many of you have heard of this model for team development? It's pretty catchy. Teams form, storm, norm, perform. Some people talk about this when they're talking about keeping teams the same. Tuckman later, with his partner, added another level to this model, which is adjourning, which, the more I think about this, kind of validates the notions that, sometimes teams end, they dissolve, they change. There's a difference there. So just to introduce myself, I'm Heidi Helfand. I'm a practitioner. I work at a company in Santa Barbara, California called Procore. We make software for the construction industry. We have offices in Sydney. Also, some people work in Melbourne. So we're growing our international presence. And I've got about 20 years of software as a service experience. So my friend Nayan here said to me once when I was giving a talk about this topic, reteaming is inevitable. So you might as well get good at it. And I find that's very true. People will come to our teams, people will leave our teams. Change is the norm. So it's almost kind of counterproductive to preach a lot of stability or to do things to stay the same. So we're going to talk about different ways to get good at reteaming. So starting with a story. So back to this picture. I was the 15th employee here at expertcity.com. And our company grew. And this is about the year 2000. We were trying to revolutionize tech support. So we created this online marketplace for tech support. You could come to our website. Our experts were standing by to answer your tech support questions. And through the magic of this screen sharing technology that we created, our experts could see and operate your computer from a distance and solve your problems. And here's me on the web development team. I was hired in as a writer, became an interaction designer, and I loved this product. I mean, we worked Sundays. We spent all this time at our startup building this product. I loved it. Loved it. And then one day, this guy walks in the room, Andreas von Blattnitz, CEO. And he said, Heidi, stop working on this marketplace product. Nobody's buying it. The product's failed. I don't care what you do. Don't create new work that you're going to have to maintain. Why don't you just go to the beach? And I was like, what? what do you mean go to the beach? Like, we had our, me, Darren, others, we had hopes and dreams for this product. Were you ever told to stop working on a product that you loved? Yeah, some of you. Yeah, you know that feeling. It's like more than a job. So I was like, okay, I can do as I'm told. Klaus later talked about this situation. Our product failed, nobody was gonna buy it. People really loved our screen sharing software, but we got the business model wrong. Nobody wanted online tech support. And we learned a very, very big lesson, which is about market validation, customer development. See if there's a market for your product before you build it. We spent $10 million doing that. And then we became students of Steve Blank. How many of you have heard him? 4 Steps to the Epiphany. We all read this book. This book has been revised, called the Startup Owner's Manual now. But we became students of market validation. So basically what that meant was we wanted to first see if somebody would buy our solution, and then we'll spend some time building it. So that's what happened next. And this is where reteaming came in, one of the first experiences that I had with a deliberate reteaming. It was a reorg. Okay? We deliberately reteamed. So the first product was failing. We were told, don't work on that anymore. So Klaus, our founder, formed a new team. He isolated the team off to the side. We had process freedom. And I was able to be part of this small team. So those are the existing teams on the left. Some people were invited over to this small team, and we were isolated, and we were working on the next product. And there was a lot of desperation because we wanted this company to succeed. And moreover, the company had been in a long, drawn-out waterfall process. But with this team off to the side, we were able to innovate. We were able to work differently. We didn't have to convince all the people around us to work differently. We had a freedom from isolation. I also call this beneficial silos. Some people say, don't have silos. Sometimes they're helpful. Okay, we were able to move quickly. We did the market validation. We created a product called GoToMyPC. And I think it's one thing that really saved our company. Years later, we would go on, we'd create and work on GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar. Okay, these were created by my team. And I'm really, really proud of them, and they're products that many people use today. So we had this isolated experience off to the side. We could have faster feedback loops, and we were able to survive. Now, years later, at the second startup I was part of, we used the isolation pattern again. At AppFolio, the second startup I was part of, we created software for property management companies. It's a very successful product that people buy and use every day. But we wanted to create a new product. Okay? So I followed my mentor, Klaus Schauser, over to the second startup. Many of the people from our first team went over there as well. And the same isolation pattern was employed again, deliberately, to innovate off to the side. In this case, the company was a little more recent, and it was very common for all of our teams to work in 2-week sprints. But in this case, it wasn't fast enough for us. So this team was able to move off to the side and work differently, faster feedback loops. Another example at this company, before we released our property management software, we created an isolated team to solve some performance issues. These guys were actually in this conference room trying to improve the performance of Property Manager before we released it. Multiple people taken from different teams, put in a team off to the side. They could innovate and move faster, attain their mission, and then dissolve. So really, if you change your teams, you're not doing it wrong. All these years as a part of fast-growing startups, and I'm hearing this dogma, suggestions, advice, best intentions, whatever you want to call it. But I'm like, what, are we doing it wrong? No, we're not doing it wrong. Citrix acquired my first startup, Expert City, for $225 million. Not bad. That was a great acquisition in my opinion, by the way. Also because at a different level, we were off to the side as an isolated division, able to do our own thing for a number of years. AppFolio's second startup I was a part of that also grew and changed, reteamed by isolation with SecureDoc's example I mentioned, went public in June 2015. So don't tell me the best teams are the ones that stay the same. I've lived it differently. AppFolio, even they have customers baking them cakes. They must be building value for their customers continuously. So then I thought to myself, well, was it just us? I've been a part of these startups. Is it just our particular experiences? Is there something that, was it our founder? I was with the same founder at 2 different companies. And so I thought I'd research this. And I was inspired by Brené Brown. She wrote this book called Daring Greatly. As the kind of research nerd that I am, in the appendix of her book, she talks about a qualitative research methodology called grounded theory. And basically what she did for her book here was you interview a bunch of different people, record the interviews, transcribe the data, and then code it for themes. So that's what I did. I interviewed about 35 people, 35 hours. The book is developing on LeanPub. It's the dynamic reteaming book. Had the interviews transcribed, code it for themes, and in a very bottoms-up fashion, I wrote about team change patterns. So that isolation pattern is one of many patterns that are described in the book. So I was illustrating a bunch of different problems in the beginning of this talk. I'll talk about some things that you can do to make things easier when your companies grow and change. So the first class of examples deal with onboarding systems. How many of you are responsible for or involved at all in onboarding new team members? Wow, a lot of you. Okay, so here are some of the things that I've learned. So I was at a company, the second startup, for more than 8 years, that when we onboarded new people, sporadically, let's say, every person was assigned a mentor. And that mentor served as the person's first pair. And so pairing is one way that I've learned that when your teams change, you add that new person to your team. They don't even have to be brand new from outside the company. They could just be moving from one team to the next. Having pair programming and mentors serving as the first pairs makes things a lot easier. So the person is not left on their own, off to the side to figure out the systems and whatnot. We would have checklists for a mentor and for a mentee for years. I remember when I was responsible for onboarding at the second startup, I'd actually print off the checklists. I'd give them to the mentor and the mentee, facilitate a conversation, and it really was like a very simple system that worked for a very long time as we gradually added people to the company. Sometimes people arrive in a batch, and we would employ different solutions when multiple people arrived at once. So these 4 people arrived at one period of time, and we'd get people together. We would, like setting up your developer environment. We'd get better and better at that, automating that so it's quicker and quicker to set up. But we'd have these systems where people would learn in a batch, and then we'd send them off to their mentors. So we didn't have that kind of duplication of efforts of a bunch of different mentors teaching things that we could centralize. What do you do when 20 people arrive in one day? Got to get a lot more formal. We'd have activities where, okay, we've got the 20 mentors and the 20 new people, and we'd have them together, and we'd have a breakfast, and we'd have different kind of ceremony to help people get up to speed. So there's specific ideas about this stuff in the book. The other thing we would do to make it easier when we had people arrive and, a great batch of people was kind of try to spread that load of people. We'd identify mentors in different teams that we had, and we would have, it was like a wave in our system. And we found that it was easy to balance that, and it was just easier overall to kind of distribute that load of new people. Now, we could have done other things. We could have had brand new teams of these people off to the side and other things. I've had other people give me the suggestion, well, you get a brand new team of these new people, you make it the job of another team to onboard and bring up that other team. There's a lot of creative ideas I'm sure many of you have about how you might do this. But for us, it really worked well to distribute this. Mob programming is another idea to make reteaming easier, and it really I think, I've interviewed Chris Lucian, who's an engineering director at Hunter Industries in Southern California, as well as Jason Kearney, who's on his team. And with mob programming, when you're programming in a group, when people come and go, it's a whole different thing. Now remember that guy that was swimming with his computer because he had to fix the issues when he was on vacation? There's less kind of safety and redundancy there. With mob programming, it's kind of like you have that community knowledge, right? So someone can come and they can join the conversation. Chris Lucian has written about this. Maybe they go through a silent period at first and get more and more comfortable. If you use mob programming timers like Mobster, maybe you can facilitate the discussion. So mob programming makes it easier. So some other things that we've done to make reteaming easier is deliberately spreading knowledge. Okay, reteaming for another reason. This is very strategic. So we want redundancy and safety of the information. We don't want, so Richard Sheridan, the author of Joy, Inc., the chief storyteller and founder of Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor, Michigan, he talks about a concept called towers of knowledge. It's like that guy in the swimming pool. We want to have companies that are safe and can continue on, and it's easy for somebody else to pick up the work. So these are some ideas for how you can deliberately spread knowledge. Okay, so first example. I talked with Evan Wiley. He's a director at Pivotal Labs Cloud Foundry. One of the things that he told me that they do is they have an app that they wrote in-house that helps keep track of who's on their teams. When I talked with him earlier this year, they had more than 50 teams. But one thing that they do is really believe in that, we do need this safety, we do need resiliency in our company. So they would deliberately have people move from team to team after a certain amount of time, and they would track how long has someone been on this team? Oh, maybe they've been there too long, so they need to switch to another team. So deliberate knowledge spread. Again, here, Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor that I was talking about. So Rich Sheridan was VP of R&D at another company before he co-founded Menlo. At this other company, he had that visceral experience where the team member left and they were the only one to know that system. When he was building this company, he was like, I don't want this to happen again. He and his co-founder deliberately built the company so everyone works in pairs, and it's not just the software engineers. They have a role called high-tech anthropologists, the people that go out to their customers to identify the customer requirements. They build custom software for a variety of different customers. So they have this redundancy in which they have pairs as the unit of work. So they have a big pool of people, and they pair and they switch pairs. They even switch out complete pairs. If a pair is stumped on a problem and a lot of time has gone by, maybe in some traditional XP circles, one person would leave, someone would remain as an anchor, and a new person would come in. But they've also experimented with complete pair switching. I found that really interesting. At Appfolio here, we had collective code ownership with multiple teams, full stack generalists. Pockets of specialization would come up, especially when we were creating systems that would maybe capture rent or pay owners. Again, this was property management software. We would deliberately spread people from team to team so that we spread out the knowledge of how to support these commerce systems, which are highly critical to our business. We would deliberately reteam to spread the knowledge. Here's a picture of Hunter, that mob programming place I was talking about earlier. This is really cool, I think, because so they have the different groups or mobs that code together, but the team members can switch from mob to mob, and they work it out themselves, and then later they inform the managers of it. So here's a little video this is a video that inspired the name of my book, Dynamic Reteaming. It's a software engineer that I worked with at Appfolio explaining a concept of when we used to dynamically reteam. Again, the phrase dynamic reteaming takes a bit of interpretation. What might be dynamic to one person is less dynamic to the other. But let's hear what he has to say.
Eventually, you want to rotate people out. but you don't want to rotate everyone out at once, right? And so what we ended up doing is I think every 6 weeks or every couple sprints or something like that, we would rotate one person out. So 3 of the team members would stay the same. We take one person in from another team, we would rotate people around, and eventually the teams would get all mixed up, and you'd get that kind of, that bigger team mentality because you're working with everybody, right? But you've got more focus on a smaller team, right?
What was that like for you?
It was really good because you got, you had that momentum with your team, right? And you knew what everyone was working on. Communication, we would sit right next to each other. Communication was, super easy. But then every few weeks you get new blood, you get new ideas, you get new faces. And there are people you see every day in the office, obviously. But I was on a team. I really liked working with Donnie, but Donnie was on another team. But I knew in a couple weeks, he might be on my team and we could do something new together.
Yeah, and so Kamran said a couple things here that I want to point out. The one thing that he mentioned was, having people move from team to team, you get more of a whole team mentality, so maybe less inter-team competition, and that's, we want to be one kind of cohesive team working towards the same goals. So moving people around helps with that, foster this kind of one team thing. The other thing he said here is, I think, a very human aspect that might get lost along the way. Remember that first slide with those robots about keep them the same? We want to have awesome predictability. Well, what about the human aspect? When your teams change, they grow and split, almost like mitosis sometimes when your companies get bigger. You might have a loss. Like you always worked, he worked with Donnie. He loved working with Donnie. Donnie moved to a different team. He'd still maybe have lunch with him or see him in the building, but it felt different. So this reteaming solution was devised by the developers. It wasn't something imposed, from somewhere else, but it's a real human thing to want to choose and work with who we want to work with. So, another strategy here to make reteaming easier is to foster community building. And so this is one thing that I'd spend a lot of time doing myself. I used to organize, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to do this, by the way. We were in Southern California, and here we would organize camping trips together, and we'd spend time getting to know each other. So if you imagine that larger engineering team, and we deliberately took our product people with us. We're all one team. Learned that from the do-over from the first startup to the second startup. Foster that relationship building between engineering and the product groups. We are one team. We take them with us. We'd all go together on different outings. Every year we'd have a tech retreat. We'd go whitewater rafting. We'd go camping. We'd even do just local things like wine tasting. We have that in our area. But having the team outings, fostering the community helps make reteaming easier later. If you buy into that forming, storming, norming, performing, whatever, team gel, like getting to know each other, maybe some of that's already taken place. So then later when you reteam, some of the work's already done. I was working with a company in Berlin at one point, Meltwater, and they had a situation where they weren't all in the same location, but they would, from time to time, fly people in for different offsite events. So fostering the relationship between remote team members, so then later it just makes things easier when you're working together. And another thing, how many of you work with some team members who are not in the same location as you? Right. How many of you regularly use video with your friends? How many just audio? It's bringing them into the room, I think, is really important, trying to level the playing field, especially if you do a huddle or a stand-up or whatnot. Having people visible, you won't forget about them if you can see them. I worked remotely once for 2 months, and it was to my advantage to have my video up there. If I attend one of my engineering whatever meetings, from a remote location, I advocate for myself and I get my video up on that screen. Makes me part of the room. If you're just in the audio of the speaker, nobody can see you. And so it's easier for fostering relationship building. And when you reteam with remote people, you have to reset all of the, if I'm a remote person, I'm on this team and they're not used to working with someone remote, there's some work to do there to help advocate for myself. But we can make it easier for them too by having checklists for when teams change. There's some of those in the book. So here's another thing, deliberately acknowledging and resetting teams, okay? So I'm trained as a coach for teams as systems by a group called CRR Global, Organizational Relationship Systems Coaching. It's very long, but it really only takes, and this philosophy is from them, it really only takes one person to have a new team. You know, one person can greatly change the team dynamic, right? You know, Weird Al shows up in your team, it might feel a little different. So one thing that we would do over the years is have team resets. So what is a reset? So it's a deliberate set of activities to start up your team again. And you know, maybe some of the work has already been done because maybe you guys would go out to lunch with different people in your company. In my company, Procore, we have a program called Get to Know You Lunches. So the company will pay for you to go out to lunch with someone you don't know, just to foster that relationship building. Makes things easier later. So team resets. So team agreements is one easy practice. These are not new ideas. I reference a lot of books within my book. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to curate and include the activities that you like. So with a lot of teams that are starting up, I would suggest that they form team agreements or a team alliance. So what do we want our team to be like? We can have a deliberate discussion about this. The other thing that I like doing with teams is talk about conflict. So as a systems coach, one of the things that we do is try to normalize the idea of conflict. Especially when we're developing products, we might not always get along. We might have disagreements. So working out in advance proactively what we want the conflict to be like is really useful. So you might learn from me some preferences that I have. If I accidentally say something and it disturbs you, what I would like, and this is for real, you could use this the rest of the conference, what I would like is let me know as soon as possible, and then maybe let's go for a walk. Maybe go outside, you could tell me about it. Give me that feedback. So I have teams that work together, and they say that, I did this last month with a team that requested it. You know, so I'm working in this R&D org of about 300 people. I offer different team reset services. I make known what the different activities are, and then I'm available to teams on a pull basis. You know, I had one colleague I was working with years ago, and I said something to her, and you know, I don't even know, I couldn't even remember what I said. She came up to me like 2 weeks later, and she's like, you know, when we were in that meeting, you said this, blah, blah, blah. And I frankly couldn't even remember. So my preference is let me know as soon as you can. I was working with a customer service team, and they could overhear each other when they were on the phone. They made team agreements, and they understood that, hey, if you hear me on a challenging phone call with the client, you know, please come and talk to me right away after. But then they learned other people have preferences like, leave me alone if you hear I have a challenging conversation. So working out and sharing this stuff is useful. Another activity that I love to do is called Market of Skills. This is an activity I learned from someone called Lisa Atkins. She wrote a book called Coaching Agile Teams. And this is the basic idea that you can come together, you can do this in an hour. Everybody makes a poster about themselves. These are the skills I bring to the team. These are my hobbies and special interests. This is what I want to learn in the next few months, and this is what I can teach you. And we just share that. And even if people have been working together for 5 or more years, they still learn something new every time. And you can imagine doing this in larger groups as well. So just kind of like sharing this information is helpful for later. Rules for living together. Is it okay if I bring my stinky fish leftovers into our team area to eat for lunch? Well, some people would say, yeah, no problem. Some other people would say, you know, please eat in the kitchen. You know, so working this stuff out in advance is helpful. And teams might already have norms, and then you're the person that moves into the team, so you reset. These are a couple of books that I recommend with further ideas about doing team resets. Liftoff, you know, we haven't talked about, all right, what is the work that we're doing? What's the vision of the work we're doing? What's the mission? What are the different things that we're working on right now and our goals? Liftoff has some great ideas about chartering. And Creating Intelligent Teams has a lot of great ideas about coaching teams as systems. Very accessible books. So another thing to make reteaming easier is focusing on the needs of the people, just tapping in. We have a culture of one-on-one walks, the last 2 companies that I was at. It doesn't even have to be with like a manager. You can support your colleagues by understanding and helping each other succeed. Surveys. I talked to Rachel Davies, who is working at Unruly in London. We're talking about team stagnation at the beginning of the talk. They would poll their team members on a periodic basis. How are you doing on your team? Are you ready for a change? And then they would find out and help facilitate that. There's different ways that you can reteam. Here's a picture at Appfolio when we had a hack day. We used to have kind of, like Atlassian would have their ship it days for 24 hours, we would have a similar kind of event. And we'd have a marketplace where people could select their own teams. We're lucky here at this conference. Sandy Mamoli is here. She's giving the Olympic talk near the end of the day. She wrote this book called Creating Great Teams, which has wonderful ideas. If you're going to enable an event where people select their own teams, you can find out exactly how to do that in her book. Highly recommend her book. So Christian Linwall is an engineering site lead for Spotify San Francisco. I talked with him earlier in the year. He's also visited my company and vice versa. And so at one point, they're organized into groups of squads, and they are organizing them into these tribes. But sometimes the tribes need to be reset. And he tells a story in the book about how with some infrastructure tribe that he was a part of, they had to reset the squads. So they got the structure down, put the squad structure up on whiteboards, took off all the names, and enabled people to say, I'd like to be on this squad, I'd like to be on that squad. And enabling people to choose the teams or the squads that they're on, I think it's really kind of more insurance for team chemistry. Because as managers or people that make the decisions of who goes on what team, they might not be aware of the social dynamics present amongst the people. So enabling people choice in who they work with, where they work, is something to consider. So at Procore recently, we did a similar exercise where we had worked out a new team structure that we had because we were resetting some teams. And we're growing, and we had a lot of new opportunities. And one of the things that we wanted to do is be more true to our company value of openness. We've got ownership, openness, and optimism are some of the values at Procore. And so one of the cool learnings from the experiment, the activity that we just did, was that, like we learned from Christian at Spotify, we put the team structure of the newly changed teams on these whiteboards so people could come up and talk about it, and this was a common occurrence. You'd see people hanging out there. But we had a lot of new positions. And so what we were more comfortable doing was we put all the names of the people that were on the existing squads on the boards, but invited and provided an opportunity for people to change squads. And then we would broker that final transaction. So we would add openness to our reteaming. Other people reteam to learn new skills. Again, talking about keeping teams the same. Sometimes we need a change. And isn't it awesome? It makes your company stickier if you enable people to move to a different team where they're working on something completely different. Tushar here wanted to work on our team at Appfolio where we were building data centers. We had physical data centers. So he was a software engineer, and he wanted to do something different. So how awesome. He didn't have to leave the company to get refreshed. He could just switch to another team. So here's another perspective.
You just get new perspectives working with different people. And so those new ideas, unless you're actively have a source of input to your team, like you're reading books together or something, it's going to stagnate over time. And so having someone else, getting experience working with other teams allows you to bring something new. Even if you're not leaving your team or joining a new team, but you can work with other people periodically, then you have a source of input for new ideas.
So when you mix it up with completely different people that you've never worked with before, and you've actually, none of your teammates have ever worked together before either, then you have like really different, even hotkeys, like you're like, oh, I didn't know there was that, key mapping there.
if the team stays stagnant, the abilities you have stay stagnant. But we have people on the global engineering team for a reason, right? They're good at certain things. They're good team members, and so mixing that up all the time is important.
This is one of the videos that I made at the beginning of my research, and I noticed that, oh my God, each of these participants are talking about stagnation. And so there's an example of that grounded theory where I get the data and I identify the themes and I write about the themes. So stagnation came from everybody else. So when you're catalyzing reteaming, I think, when I started giving talks about this, I thought, this really isn't about reorgs, but it really is all about reorgs. Sometimes, and it could be at the very small level where you add one person to a team or one person leaves, you get a new team. It's a change. I found that when we want it to happen, we tend to like it. When we don't want it to happen, it's a little more challenging. But there's certain things that you can do to make it easier when you're deliberately trying to reteam. And I've indicated some of them earlier with like team choice and whatnot, but here's some other things. So back in the beginning of the talk, I had that when you have that really large team, and that was our original team at the startup that grew bigger, bigger, and bigger at Appfolio. And at one point we split into two, and a tradition started where people would name the teams, and they'd have geeky spins on band names here. We have the Hex Pistols and Def Leppard. We'd have the Foo Fighters. We had a Ace of Rebase. We had a wide variety of team names that ensued over the years, and it became like a cultural thing about our teams. And it's hard to split or to change teams. How many of you have experienced that before, where your team has to change, and it's really, really hard? And I think giving people some power in this situation is helpful. At Unruly in London, when one of their first teams split, they commemorated it with the Lord of the Rings cake, splitting of the Fellowship, or whatever it was. And they had a cake, they celebrated it. So having this as an event is something to consider. So I've got a lot of growth at Procore, a lot of people coming, going, a lot of different growth. We have teams that naturally grow and split. We have others that really want to split, but it's hard and it kind of drags out. So here's some general tips. Don't share team members. If you're splitting, have them be separate teams. If you have a list of people that are shared with the resulting split, you're not really split. People are going to have to go to twice as many meetings. Sometimes it's not so helpful to split. Even if you get bigger, if there's a lot of interdependent work, you might want to keep it together. Don't drag out the split. Do it. Rip off the Band-Aid. Make it real by changing desks or reset your communication if you're remote. And celebrate the split. Have a cake, make it an event. We'd have a change desks party. Remember that case where I had 20 people join at once, wave in the system? We played music, we changed desks, we made it fun. Combining teams is another thing that happens. Here's a story from William, them at TradeMe, where they had a bunch of teams separate. Sometimes we combine them. They were knocking off work in a list. They were porting from one platform to another. Visualizing teams, as well as the changes in teams, just on whiteboards is super helpful, especially when you're growing fast. Patrick Lencioni, he wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Many of us in the last 6 months at my company read the book The Advantage. He says something here that has a lot of truth. Remember that reteaming I was showing you with the whiteboards from Procore? Well, we tried our best. We had emails, we had Slack messages, we had all hands R&D meetings. We had so many things to try to get off to the people what the ideas were, what we were doing with our reorg. Very, very difficult, but you have to say it a lot, often, in multiple channels. And another thing is putting it in the hands of the people. Reflect on your team composition. It's almost like a forgotten thing at Agile. It's been okay to change requirements, to do things more adaptively, but what about the teams? Reflect on how the teams are. Maybe you want to change, or maybe not. If the chemistry is awesome, maybe you want to keep that team together. It's totally valid. So, I think really reteaming is inevitable. You might as well get good at it. Sometimes your bus is going to break down. What are you going to do? You're going to push it. You're going to sit in the corner and not know what to do. You can get good at this stuff. So I'm Heidi Helfand. You can get a copy of my book on LeanPub. I'm looking for comments and feedback on it as well as I finish it up. And thank you so much for your attention and participation. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks.
We do have time for a couple of questions if anybody's got some.